the Blue River Basin, which is District 36 in Division 5, which is the Colorado River Basin. I am a state employee. I work for the Colorado Division of Water Resources, which is under the umbrella of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. A couple of my sister agencies, Colorado Water Conservation Board and Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So I'm a state employee whose, I guess, area of purview is the county of Summit County here in the Blue River Basin. And also would just like to, I guess, add to what Cam shared. I have a very fond appreciation, respect, and love for Friends of Dillon Ranger District. Howdy doozy. I was one of the original board members when FDRD was founded. Was on the board for quite some time and was also their volunteer coordinator back in 2007, a little bit of 08. And as Cam mentioned, I still remain involved, whether it's hikes or trail maintenance projects. And for those of you who have not joined FDRD in any of their projects, I highly encourage you to get out and do so, because it's great group of folks doing some amazing work. The Dillon Ranger District, they're overburdened and understaffed and underfunded, and FDRD plays a critical role in filling that gap and maintaining those trails that we all just absolutely love to use every year, year in and year out. So if you haven't, highly encourage you to get out there and join them for a project. Okay. So if you give me just a moment here, I will fire up the presentation and share my screen. Okay. So Cam, if you could just give me a thumbs up that you can see an image there. Okay, great. I guess just as a curious side note, we can prompt some of our viewers, if someone wants to chime in, hopefully someone who's outside of Summit County, if you can chime in and name this body of water, which is located in Summit County, and where that water is used. I'll just give you a shout out and a kudos. So like I said, Colorado Division of Water Resources, that is who I work for and who I represent. And just to share with you or to clarify, you don't have to own water or water rights or well permit for me to be, I guess, I don't want to say encumbered, that's not the right word. I am subject, I serve all the citizens of the state. Let's put it that way, whether or not you own a water right. Because here in Colorado, the waters of the state are for the people of the state. And the people who have water rights, they don't physically own the water. And this may come as a surprise to folks who do own water. What they own is a right to divert that water and put it to beneficial use, which we'll talk about in a little more detail here shortly. So just a brief outline. In putting together this presentation, I realized, it's kind of the intent or purpose of this, as I understand it, is I am going to kind of go through and talk about where we're at as far as our most precious resource, the water resource here in Summit County. And when I was putting it together, I realized, there's some context that's very important prior to jumping right into it. Some terms, some terminology, and just some explanations, which will hopefully be very helpful in the rest of the presentation. So going to open up with that, and then we'll talk about the current situation as far as snowpack, and then we'll look at what we might expect as far as stream flows going into the summer. And then towards the end, I hope to kind of broaden the picture and look at the entire Colorado River Basin and just kind of put some ticklers out there, some ideas, some thoughts, some ponderings, and hopefully each one of you also will ponder and throw out some questions, and we can have somewhat of a dialogue if possible.
Troy, we had someone chime in saying, looks like goose pasture tarn, that previous picture.
Absolutely, correct. Yeah, it's goose pasture tarn. Normally it holds 800 acre feet, 400 acre feet of which goes to the town of Breckenridge, and the other 400 acre feet goes to the Breck ski area for snowmaking purposes. So kudos, shout out to whoever answered that. So usually when I start this, as far as the context, one of the most important, or I think most critical things about water here in Colorado is the climate. And I think that's something that's very easily dismissed or not looked at very closely. And so usually when I do a presentation like this, I'll just kind of ask for a show of hands, how many people are from back east? And before you raise your hands or before you answer, I need to clarify my definition of east because it's much more broad than what most of you are probably thinking. My definition of east, as this slide will show, is east of the 100th meridian. So that red line there on this graphic of the United States represents the 100th meridian. And so it's a much more liberal definition of east. And so if, you know, when I ask that question, you know, I think typically I'll get at least, I don't know, 40 to 60% of folks will raise their hands, say they've been out east. And then when I ask the next question, how many of you have at least been out east? And I think the majority of folks can raise their hands and say, yeah, I've at least been out there and I've seen it. Well, why is that significant? Well, I'm sure maybe some of you intuitively or experientially probably know or suspect, you may know the answer to this, seeing that the topic is water. And what is significant about that 100th meridian, and by the way, it was a very, very smart fella by the name of John Wesley Powell, who kind of called this out or recognized it way back in the 1860s. He traveled out west, you know, go out west, young man, and he explored, and basically his description along with others was, you know, once you get past that 100th meridian, it's pretty much a dry, arid environment, not much water. And as a lot of you probably know, either living or having visited back east, you don't have to walk around too far in the woods to stumble across, walk through, step over a babbling brook, a creek, a stream, come across a pond or a lake. And that's because out east, annual average precipitation is greater than 20 inches. In a lot of places, I think Debbie, she said she's from Florida. Now, I'm not sure what exactly the numbers are, but I guarantee it's north of 40. And some places can approach 50 or 60 inches of precipitation a year. And out west, that number is lower than 20 inches of annual precipitation in a year. And specifically for here in Colorado, for us, that average annual precipitation is 15.5 inches. And so you may ask, well, why is that significant? It is significant in the sense that west of that 100th meridian, if you want to grow a crop, if you want to irrigate pasture, you need supplemental irrigation. You cannot rely on just Mother Nature alone to irrigate your crops. So that is the significance of it. You know, whereas out east, you've got abundant water and you have easy access to it. Here in the West, fewer and further between. You know, just think of your traipsings here in Summit County when you're out in the forest. You know, we absolutely have creeks and streams and, you know, water features, but they're nowhere near as abundant as what you see out east. So which leads us to the two primary, we'll call them doctrines of water law in the United States. Out east, because water is abundant, they operate under what's called the riparian doctrine, or the riparian water rights system. And in a nutshell, what the riparian water rights system says is that if you are a landowner, if your property in any way is adjacent to or abuts a stream, creek, river, lake, pond, you have the right to use the waters from that water body and put them to a beneficial use, so long as your use is not detrimental or does not negatively impact others on that water body. So in this example, landowner A has property that abuts the stream, the river, and therefore has right to divert water out of that river and put it to beneficial use. Property owner B does not. And one thing I came across early on in one of my earlier careers as a GIS analyst, I was looking at properties or property lines in Louisiana. And what's interesting, under the riparian system, you have these properties which are very oddly shaped. You know, they try to maximize river or waterfront property. And so you come up with these odd properties where they're long and narrow. So that way, and it doesn't matter if it's 50 feet or 100 feet of waterfront property. It could be as little as 1 foot. If you have property that abuts that water, then you have a right to use it. Out here out west, we have a very, very different water rights system. And some of you may have heard of it. It's called the prior appropriation system. Some other terms you may have heard are first in time, first in right. So if you can imagine back in the 1850s, you know, when the miners were out here, and that's how Summit County was developed by, well, obviously you had fur trappers before that, but where things really kind of took off was when the miners came. They started staking their claims for placer mining and you know, digging into the mountains for precious metals. And the way they administered those mineral rights was basically it was the predecessor to the prior appropriation system, first in time, first in right. So the first person to stake a claim to a mining claim was the person who had priority over everyone after that person to that mining claim. And interesting enough, a lot of these mining claims, particularly the placer mining, they needed an abundant source of water to do their mining operations. So placer mining, you know, just for those of you who may not be familiar with it, imagine just a huge fire hose with water that is under incredible amount of pressure, and just taking that hose and spraying the side of the mountain, the hillside, and just washing away the entire hillside with that high pressure water, and, you know, trying to sort out the gold from everything else. Well, what they found, you know, again, going back to the prevalence of water, what they found is these mining claims did not always, you know, they weren't always proximal to bodies of water. So you would find these miners would have to build sluice boxes and you know, diversions and ditches to bring water from the next drainage or two drainages over to where their mining operation was. So that's kind of the foundation of the current prior appropriation system of water rights administration here in Colorado. And this graphic hopefully represents that. So on this graphic, you see in the red, basically the 1880 water right for 2 CFS. So they were first in time. They came in and staked their claim back in 1880. And then you have the purple line over to the left, 1950 for 2 CFS, and then a latecomer, 1980 for 2 CFS. So under the prior appropriation system, first in time, first in right, in an average or above average year, so let's say we have 15 CFS of water in this creek, everyone gets their water, everyone's happy and content and can go about doing whatever their beneficial use of water is, whether it's mining, agriculture, industry, whatever it might be. In years of scarcity, like 2002, 2012, and arguably, depending on how my forecast goes, we'll look at that here soon, 2021 might be included among those ranks. Let's say you only have 1.5 feet of water, so 1.5 CFS of water in the creek. Well, what happens is both the 1950 and the 1980 water right, since they are junior to that 1880, they cannot divert water. And the 1880 water right, basically what they do is they talk to their local water commissioner, yours truly, say, hey, Troy, there's only 1.5 feet of water in the creek. Please go tell the folks upstream they need to curtail their diversions. And in this case, they would have to stop their diversions entirely to serve that downstream senior water right. So in a nutshell, that is prior appropriation system.
So Troy, is kind of the big difference between this and what's going on to the east is that in the east, if you're on the river, you can kind of take up as much as you want without thinking about downstream users, or am I off on that?
Not terribly off. I mean, it's not as limited. They do have some caveats where I think maybe I mentioned you can take the water and put it to beneficial use, so long as your use is reasonable and you're not causing unreasonable harm to your downstream neighbors. So it's slightly different, and typically, like I said, water sources are so abundant, and I guess abundant. We'll just use that word. It's not typically a problem, although, however, you can look at recent years out east. Examples in Georgia and Florida pop into head, where they also are running into problems. And we'll probably discuss or touch on those later, just growing population, climate change, reduced volumes of water, increasing demands on the water supplies. So they also are experiencing increased pressure. So a few definitions to help folks as I go through this conversation, this presentation. So the most common unit, or we'll call it the unit of measurement for water, is CFS, or cubic foot per second. And so to give you a visual on this, imagine a cube 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot. That is 1 cubic foot of water. It's it's about 7.5 gallons of water. And so another visual which might help you is if you can imagine a basketball. If you can imagine a basketball, that's just an approximation. It's probably just a little bit smaller than a 1 foot cube, but gives you a good visual of how much water is in a cubic foot. And 1 cubic foot of water per second amounts to, or equates to, 450 gallons per minute. So if we had one cubic foot of water and we were to run that 1 cubic foot of water for 24 hours, we would have 2 acre feet of water. So for those of you who have, maybe this visual will help you understand what an acre foot is. So if you can picture a football field absent the end zones, cover that field with 1 foot of water, that's 1 acre foot of water, which is also 325,500, or actually 851.4 gallons of water, give or take. To put that into perspective, depending on how much outdoor water use there is in a household, 1 acre foot of water can serve anywhere from 2 to 4 average households of 4. And again, that discrepancy between 2 to 4 is entirely dependent on how much of that water is used for outdoor irrigation. That is the primary use of water in domestic households. And actually, let me go back. I just want to make sure, I want to give everyone sees numbers, values differently. So this reservoir behind me, which most of you are probably familiar with, Dillon Reservoir, it holds about 250,000 acre feet of water. So depending on what numbers you use, the entire volume of Dillon Reservoir could serve either 500,000 or 1 million households for 1 year.
We had a question pop up that I was also curious about. You said that the 1 acre foot of water serves 2 to 4 households. Is that per year?
Yeah, per year. Yep. And that's an average. And again, entirely dependent on how much outdoor water irrigation, landscape irrigation. So to put it in a different light, currently the 10 Mile Creek, which flows into Dillon Reservoir at Frisco, right there off Summit Boulevard, is currently flowing, last I checked, right about 100 CFS. So 100 CFS for 24 hours, you multiply that by 2, that gives you 200 acre feet a day. So if Dillon Reservoir were empty and we started filling today with only 10 Mile as the input, you do the math, it works out to approximately 3 years to fill Dillon Reservoir at 100 CFS. So just trying to give you, everyone sees it differently, just trying to help you spatially with trying to kind of ballpark what that looks like, or what kind of volumes and kind of time we're looking at. So now with that background information, hopefully we can start a little discussion about forecast. So as most of you probably know, forecasting, yeah, we're looking at the future. We're trying to predict future conditions, but we need to take a look back at past or previous conditions to help inform us in making that forecast. So one of the first things that I look at this time of year is I look at the water year precipitation. So for water wonks, for water utility managers, for water managers, the water year typically depends on who you talk to, but either starts on October 1st or November 1st. In my world, it starts on November 1st, but for most folks, it starts October 1st. And that's based on what is typically the start of the snow accumulation season. So what this graphic shows you is what the precipitation over the water year from October 1 through April, what it looks like compared to average. And as I've circled there, kind of circled in on the center of that is Summit County, kind of to the northeast is Grand County. You can see that during that period, we experienced precipitation was about 70 to 90% of average. So definitely well below average. You can see the reds looking throughout the entire Colorado River Basin. As you go south, southwest, it gets much more dire. This graphic shows the same thing, but this is just for the month of April. I call this out because, as a lot of you probably are aware experientially, April was abnormally dry, abnormally warm. And this will play out, or visually we'll see this again in other contexts or formats. But I just want to call it out. April was unusually dry and warm, which kind of added to kind of where we're at now. And no, you're not misreading that. You might be looking at that text up top and thinking, well, what the heck you got this in there for? Well, again, we have to look at past conditions to better enable us to kind of look at future forecasts. I'll explain to you why I chose this particular year, but so this looks at water year precipitation for what was then water year 2018, which started in October of 2017. And so again, looking at this, 70 to 90% of average is what our precipitation was then. So maybe kind of file that away in the back of your head. Another thing that folks, maybe don't necessarily think of. If you're not a water wonk or water geek like myself or others, you want to look at what the soil moisture was going into the snow accumulation season. So what this graphic shows is it shows what the soil moisture situation is for the period. Well, actually, this one, I'm sorry, it doesn't show the water year soil moisture. It shows our current soil moisture conditions. And why that is significant is because, so what this shows is the depth to saturation. So as you might imagine, if you have to go deeper into the soil to get saturated, to where the soil is saturated, you have a lot more space for snow melt or precipitation to precipitate into the ground rather than running off the surface and filling the streams and subsequently the reservoirs.
Is that taken at a certain elevation, Troy?
No, so what this is showing is elevations across the entire Colorado River Basin. And so if you look here, can you see my arrow here, my pointer?
Yeah.
Right at the tip of my arrow is Dillon Reservoir. And so as you kind of go up from there, you see that it's actually the higher elevations where the soil moisture is much more dire. And then as you go down, it improves. And I apologize. I had meant to put in a different graphic because April's warm temperatures definitely influenced this. It probably improved the soil moisture conditions at mid and lower elevations because those warmer temperatures kind of prompted the snow melt a little earlier than usual, which then kind of helped saturate the soils. So this situation here currently is a little bit rosier than what it would have been, say back in March or February. And then again, going back to that 2018, we're looking just kind of comparatively looking at what the soil moisture was like back then. Unfortunately, despite, instead of depth to saturation, we have a percentage of average, but hopefully you can all see that, soil moisture was probably just a little bit better back then, but still, a little south of normal. Now's the fun part. So we talked about the antecedent conditions. Now we're going to look at what the snowpack looked like. And here in Colorado and a lot of places throughout the West, we have two primary methods of basically measuring the snowpack. One are the automated snowtell sites. Snowpack telemetry is what that is a kind of acronym for. Yeah, that's the photo at the upper left. So if you can imagine, if you look at the center of that structure there's a pillow that holds air, and it basically measures the barometric pressure on top of that pillow, and through that they can determine what the weight of the snow is above that pillow. So that's kind of an automated method for measuring the snowpack and what is called the SWE, which is a snow water equivalent. In the lower right, you see yours truly out doing what's called a manual snow survey. So this snow survey course is right off of, it's in the town of Blue River just before you start going up Hoosier Pass. And it's a manual method of doing the exact same thing that the snowtell site does. In a nutshell, basically what we're doing is we're measuring the water content of the snowpack. And so to give you all kind of a visual, if you were to take 1 foot of snow and flash melt it, depending on the season and the type of snow, typically you're gonna if you were to melt that 1 foot of snow, you're only going to get about 1.2 inches to 2 inches of water. 1.2 would probably represent like the January or February snow that's really light, your champagne powder. And closer to 2 would probably represent or be more representative of your March slush dumps that we receive. So generally speaking, 10 to 20%. So when folks look at a mountainside and see 5 feet of snow, you know, that a lot of folks think, oh yeah, well, we're in great shape. Well, it has a lot to do with the density of that snow and how much water is actually available in that snow. And this I just stumbled across this morning. I threw it in because it's really fascinating. And Denver Water, if you all want to take a look at this article, it's really fascinating. You can Google Coyote Gulch. It's a great resource for all things water news in the West. Not just the West, basically all things water. Denver Water has invested a lot of money in this in recent years, I think just in the last 3 or 4 years. What they do is they fly a plane crisscross, zigzag across the Blue River Basin. And they have LIDAR, which is a form of radar, and they can measure the depth of the snowpack. And why this is helpful, it's tremendously helpful because the SNOTEL sites and snow survey sites that I showed you on the previous slide are typically at much lower elevations. And so this time of year, when those sites have melted out, you know, the ability to forecast what remains on the mountain to come down and fill the creeks and rivers and reservoirs is in large part unknown. You know, we can base it kind of on historic records, and we can kind of, you know, we can guesstimate what might be up there, but this technology gives us a much more accurate assessment of what's still available at those higher elevations. Ooh, boy, I better check all the time. You get me going and I'll ramble. So taking that SNOTEL site data as well as a snow survey data and this does not include the LIDAR data. This is what our snowpack played out to be. So if you look at that, the green line is for this water year. And so you can see that we peaked at right about 82%. And depending on which SNOTEL sites you look at, this number will vary. We'll just say it was less than 90%, but depending on which gauge sites you look at, it could be as much as 86, but we'll just call it 82 for the sake of argument. Currently, present day, we're at 100% of median. And what that number means is we're 100% of median for this day, not as a percentage of the seasonal average, which is represented by this blue line. That's kind of the average for the 40-year period. Some of you may have looked at, I'm sorry. So the red line represents that year 2018. So water year 2018. There's a great function on this mapping or this graphing tool where you can choose a year that's most similar to the year that you're in. And so this is the one that came back with the most similar pattern. And for some of you who may have looked at this and may have picked out, you kind of look at that. If you look at the green line, so that's 2021, current year, compare it to the average and compare it to the red line, which is 2018. One of the things that may jump out at you, first of all, is that the peak snowpack is a good 2 weeks earlier than average. And that is very significant for a number of reasons. First of all, typically, you know, in a typical year, we'd have snow accumulation that's you know, continuing through April rather than ending at the beginning of April. So we're losing out on that additional potential snowpack. The other thing is, you know, as we experienced in April, we had those warmer temperatures. And what happens with those warmer temperatures, as exemplified by that huge dip in the snowpack, is we lose a significant amount of our snowpack. Well, why is that important? Well, because typically what we want to do is we want to keep that snow up on the mountain, have it melt off gradually throughout the summer season for all of the multitude of uses that we put that water to use for. You know, and you all can think of your own water uses, but you know, there's agriculture, there's fishing, there's rafting. So that's that's kind of one of the things I really want to highlight from this graphic is just earlier end to the snow accumulation and earlier snow melts.
So is that kind of saying like it's better for our environment, our agriculture, our recreation to have a, rather than like a fast melt where it's dumping water into our rivers in a very quick high period, it's better to have it more elongated, not as raging?
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess it's preferred to have. So a lot of folks they don't maybe recognize or think of it in these terms, but that snowpack is Colorado's largest reservoir. You know, the reservoir behind me tries to capture a portion of that, but that snow, if we can keep it up on the mountainside as long as possible, that's ideal. You know, because then what we can do is we can feed those streams and rivers throughout the summer season, you know, when the water use is typically at its highest. And not only that, but if it's staying up high longer, then the typical low flow season in the fall and going into early winter, you know, that's when the rivers and the streams are I guess taxed most, you know, by low flows and overuse of water. Yeah, so we can keep it up on the mountain and have a longer, more drawn out, I guess, melt or runoff. Did that answer the question?
Absolutely, thanks.
Okay. So that's current conditions. Now we turn to, you know, what the future conditions might be. And so NOAA puts out these great forecasts. And of course, you know, this is the 1 month, this is the 1 month outlook. So tongue in cheek, right? You know, forecasts are much less accurate or valuable the longer you look out the window. But I guess the general take home message here is for the 1 month outlook for the next 30 days, precipitation is anticipated to be lower than average, you know, in Texas, New Mexico, Colorado. And as you look at the 1 month temperature probability, also we have increased chance for higher than average temperatures for Colorado and basically almost the entire United States from this graphic. And then we can take a little further look out and look at the 3 month prediction for precipitation. And again, you can see that Colorado falls in the below average precipitation prediction, looking out 3 months. That's basically through the summer. And again, for temperatures, right now, currently looking at the next 90 days throughout the summer, higher than average temperatures. So of course, that all plays right into how long we can anticipate that snowpack to stay up on the hillside. So this graphic I like to look at. The Colorado River Basin Forecast Center puts out these peak flow forecasts, which I think are very valuable. One of the things I want to point out at first is you can see how, so those green bars basically represent the, I guess the window or the spectrum of possibility. That's the range of possibility for peak flow. And you can see that earlier on the season, back in March, that window was very, very wide, very broad. And as you get closer to present day, like this last forecast, May 1st, that window is narrowing. So that, you know, as we get closer, their ability to forecast is a little more accurate. And to explain to folks, so that green square right in the middle represents the peak forecast. This is 10 Mile Creek. So right now, the peak forecast for 10 Mile Creek is 400 cubic feet per second. That number, so basically what that means, that's the 50% value. So we have a 50% chance that the forecast will exceed that. We have a 50% chance that the forecast will be lower than that. And if you go up, if you look at this arrow here, that represents what's called the 25% exceedance value. So what that means is there's a 25% chance that the peak flow will exceed that value. So now the reason for 2018 kind of comes into play here. So I chose 2018 because it's most similar to 2021. That red circle represents what the peak flow was back in 2018 runoff season. So let's say we all have our rose tinted glasses on, and we want to bank on the peak flow, being within that 25% exceedance, that 1 in 4 probability or chance that the peak flow exceeds the 400 CFS. Well, just taking a precursory look at this, you can see that, let's ballpark it. I'd say even if we have that rosiest of runoffs, our peak forecast on 10 Mile Creek is going to fall in the lower 10 to 20% of peak runoffs in the historic record, which I'm pretty sure this goes back about 40. No, it goes back more than that because I see 61 in there. It goes back at least 60 years. So we can anticipate peak flows, at least from this analysis, to be probably in the lower 10 to 20% of average. Excuse me 1 second, I have a pooch that needs to go outside. So that's for 10 Mile Creek. Now, if we turn to the Snake River, which feeds into the east end of Dillon Reservoir, again, I just want to point out, there's the 2018 comparative. Here's the range of variables, or I guess the range of possible forecasted peak flows well below that 2018. And so now, if you remember, we looked at the precipitation and the soil moisture content going into the 2018 season, or 2018 runoff. Arguably, given the numbers we looked at, I would say that the conditions now are much worse than what they were back in 2018. So I think we can be very confident that we are not going to exceed, even the rosiest forecast for peak flow on both the 10 Mile and the Snake, and as a corollary, all the other streams and rivers here in Summit County. So that, in a nutshell, is how this one takes a look at current conditions and forecasted conditions, and tries to at least get an idea of what we can anticipate going into the summer runoff. And so I throw this picture up here just to hopefully, this is one of my teasers. How do these much lower than average stream flows, how do they impact water supply, water use, recreation, agriculture, your own personal water use at your household? And I would also like to just kind of draw us all out. We've been focused here on the Blue River Basin, but I want to take us up to that 20,000 foot altitude, and remember that we are at the headwaters. Literally, the Blue River is a headwater tributary to the Colorado River, and the Colorado River serves 7 states, 2 countries. The last numbers that I saw, we have 40 million people who rely on the water that flows down the Colorado River. The last number I saw, just don't take this to the bank, but I think there's about 2 million acres of irrigated lands that are served by water that starts here in our backyard. And I say this just to remind you all that it's not just us who rely on this water. There's a lot of wildlife, not only not only aquatic, but also terrestrial wildlife. I think they tend to get the short end of the stick. There's agricultural water uses, industry, I mean, you name it. There's a very broad spectrum. So, and just to give you, sorry, that's a graphic showing last year's fires. So of course, that's another thing to kind of keep in mind. Obviously with dry conditions, we're gonna have, absent that monsoon moisture that we normally would have, which has been absent the last 2 years, we can definitely anticipate another nail biter as far as fire hazard, fire risk. I'll throw this graphic up here just to let you all see. So you have the seven basin states, upper basin states, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado, and a portion of New Mexico. Lower basin states being Arizona, Nevada, and Utah, or I'm sorry, Arizona, Nevada, and California. And how much time do I have here? I just want to point out one thing, which just very interesting, very fascinating, and is basically kind of the foundation of why we have what's called the Colorado River Compact of 1922. Take a look at, if you look over here in this corner, just take a look at the portion, the land mass of California that falls within the Colorado River Basin. So arguably, just visually, you look at that and I would say maybe 5% of the Colorado River Basin falls in California. However, California, through the Colorado River Compact, for the lower basin, they have, the lion's share. It's about 54 to 58% of the lower basin's share of 7.5 million acre feet. So this all goes back to the prior appropriation. Fortunately, here in Colorado, particularly on the western slope, we had some very smart, prescient, forward-looking folks who saw the writing on the walls. And by the legal interpretation, legal application of the prior appropriation system, back then, California could very well have staked a claim for half or more of the available flows in the Colorado River Basin under the prior appropriation system. They had a much larger population. They had ranchers, farmers, industry that could very easily put the water to beneficial use. And they could have very easily basically swept the river. And so fortunately, thankfully, we had a 1922 compact which divided the basin into upper basin states, lower basin states, 7.5 million acre feet for the upper basin states, 7.5 million for the lower basin states. I'm going to stop there because I've been rambling far too long. And that's why I like the in-person, because, you all can throw questions, pepper questions. I'm going to stop rambling and open up to anyone who has any kind of question, water related, whether it's local or basin wide. It's sky's the limit. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Troy. That last bit is like one of the most interesting pieces of this, is just the percentage of the water rights that California is getting comparative to how much of the area of the basin their state falls in. But yeah, I really encourage everyone to type a question into the comment section. I know that Facebook's on a bit of a delay, so while you guys are typing in questions or thinking up some questions for Troy, Troy said he prefers it's in-person talks much more than these. So kind of to bounce off that, on September 17th, we're going to be going out with Troy after the summer is kind of over and see how this forecast played out. So we'll be able to walk along a river or with a view of the Dillon Dam, the Dillon Reservoir. And you can ask Troy questions about like what happened this summer. And I just think it's going to be a great way to like wrap up the summer after looking at it from this lens that we just did of forecasting. So you can sign up for that on the FDRD website on our calendar page. Just scroll over to September 17th and you'll find it there. There's still 7 spots left, I believe, when I just checked. So if you're tuned in now, I would definitely recommend it. But yeah, I think Check Facebook.
Perfect. Can I ask you a quick question?
Absolutely. Go for it, Doozy.
Yeah, so that last image you had of just that sliver of California and the amount of water that they have right to, how is that collected and then disseminated? Is it just through reservoirs and you know, in just that tiny part of the state? I assume it's being spread over more of that area, or is that water specific to that little fraction of the state there?
Excellent question. And one thing I want to clarify, I don't point this out to in any way, I guess, dismiss or denigrate California. The intent there was just to show the power of the power appropriation system and how significant it was that it was Western Slope legislators here in Colorado who saw the writing on the wall and said, hey, we need to sit down and talk about this. One thing I want to point out, which I didn't really, was, so to answer your question, first of all, Doozy, reservoirs and pipelines. So you see the Colorado River aqueduct. I don't know if you can see it on the scale from your perspective, but that aqueduct takes Colorado River water and basically supplies the Central Valley, Los Angeles, San Diego, basically a good portion of metropolitan Southern California. And so even though they fall outside of the Colorado River Basin proper, you know, again, going back to power appropriation system, you don't have to be within the same basin of where that water originates to divert that water and put it to beneficial use. So you see over here in California, we've got the southern coastal cities and metropolis areas. And then also, it's very important to point out, you also have portions, you know, a good portion of New Mexico and absolutely here in Colorado. Dillon Reservoir represents 40% of Denver's water supply. It's a very, I mean, it is a central piece of Denver's water supply. So does that answer your question, Doozy? Yeah, okay.
We had one from a bit earlier from Matt Bleen, basically just saying he's interested in getting involved more locally. Is there like an organization that he could get involved in this more to either learn more or volunteer or donate?
Yes, thank you for asking. I think he said his name is Matt. Matt, thank you for asking. You know, that's one thing I neglected to ask at the beginning was I had intended to ask you all to take off your hats, and your hat being, you know, whatever perspective or vantage point you're coming from with respect to water and your relationship to water. You know, because it's, I think the thing that I want to drive home for everyone is it's a shared resource. And we're all scrambling to use and come up with new uses for what is a very limited and decreasing water supply, and decreasing in large part due to increasing demands, increasing population, and climate change. And just real quick, anticipated further reductions in the Colorado River flows of about 30% by mid-century, due in large part, if not exclusively, to increased evaporation from higher temperatures, increased evaporation and evapotranspiration. So Matt, to get to your point, yeah, so locally here in Summit County, Blue River Watershed Group, that would be the first group that I would highly recommend. I was a former board member with them and current advisory board member. Was involved with them for, still involved since their inception, just like with FDRD. Another group I would recommend, just a slightly different angle, would be the High Country Conservation Center, HC3. They work more on kind of the, let's say the domestic and municipal side of things, working on water conservation. So those are two groups I would point you to, definitely. If you're interested more in the kind of the bigger picture education component, you can look at Water Education Colorado, another fabulous group here in Colorado. Their acronym is WECO. Used to be the Colorado Foundation for Water Education. Now they're known as WECO, Water Education Colorado. that's a few. And then of course, please, by all means, all of you, since I am your water commissioner, regardless of whether or not you live here in this county, arguably the folks in Central Valley in California, I represent them as well, because that's what I do is I administer the water rights to make sure that everyone's using only that amount that they're legally entitled to. And the Colorado River Basin is over appropriated, meaning we have more water rights on paper than we have physical water available. And it's getting, as we've demonstrated, it's going south more and more each year. We're in the 20-year extended drought, and a lot of folks are saying we should drop the term drought because drought implies that there's an end to it. And they prefer that we start using aridification, because we are talking on the time scale of thousands of years, looking back at tree ring analyses. We are in the midst of a mega drought, and from all the predictions and forecasts and all the evidence we have available to us, it's getting worse, and no indication that it's going to rebound. That graphic that was up there, 28% of average predicted inflow to Lake Powell. 28% of average. I mean, we're talking like 1.2 million acre feet approximately, as opposed to more on the order of 6.8 to 7.2 million acre feet. So I don't want to be a doomsday sayer. I have full confidence that we all can work together and make improvements, but it's just a matter of taking those necessary steps and making those improvements. And those start at an individual level. The choices that you make on a daily basis and how you use water, and how you use water on an individual or household basis will inform your water at the community and county and state level. So anyway, I'll stop rambling. There's my contact information. Please feel free to email, call. I'm more than happy to have individual conversations over coffee or beer. We can go into much more depth and detail over any and all of this. I neglected to mention that one of my most favorite aspects of my job, other than working outside most of the year and working with our most critical resource, is doing education and outreach. So Cam, Doozy, FDRD, thank you all very, very much for these opportunities to speak at these events. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everyone's participation and attendance and questions.
Thank you, Troy. I think FDRD is so supremely appreciative of you being a part of us, and you were there in the early days, and for you to still give back and spread this information to the people is huge. I know you're a busy guy, especially this time of year. So we're wildly appreciative of you, man. And it is huge that you're doing this. And everyone on Facebook is saying, thank you, Troy. Excellent presentation, et cetera, et cetera. So a bunch of blue thumbs popping up on the screen for likes on the video.
Well, share it with your friends and have them share it with their friends.
So this video will be available on Facebook as soon as I wrap this up here on our Facebook page. I've also recorded it on Zoom, so we'll upload it probably tomorrow to our YouTube channel, Friends of the Dawn Ranger District YouTube. And as Troy touched on earlier, like this seemed short. I mean, we took the full hour, but I would so highly recommend taking one of the spots that's still available in this hike in September on the FDRD calendar and going out there with Troy, because we'll have 3 hours to kick around ideas with him and, just ask him questions. I mean, in the 1 3-hour presentation I went on 2 summers ago with him, I knew nothing about the subject, and then it became an area of interest for me immediately. So he's an encyclopedia on this stuff. He's been living and breathing it for 8-10 years now, so if not more. It is a pretty awesome opportunity. I would recommend it. But yes, thank you again so much, Troy. You rock, man. We will.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Troy.
And everyone
awesome presentation.
And everyone who attended and participated, and those who watch in the future, please feel free to reach out with any questions, concerns, comments. I look forward to that hike in September. We'll see how how accurate the forecast is. So in a nutshell, 85% snowpack is not going to interpret or not going to translate or correlate into 85% stream flow. I think a more reasonable estimate would be probably more in the range of 50 to 60% of average for the stream flows, if not worse.
Sweet. We'll see.
Thanks for the info, Troy. Pleasure as always.
Thanks, take care, everyone.
All right, we're off.